Hey buds, how's it going? So something I've been thinking about a lot recently, especially with the Me Too movement, but also before that, is sexual harassment and the customer service industry. So I've done a lot of work in the service industry, and this isn't a call out post for any of the jobs I've worked at. They've mostly been really great environments, but I am interested in the sort of culture around customer service jobs, front-facing jobs, and how that culture feeds into entitlement and sexual harassment. So it seems pretty clear at this point that no job is exempt from sexual harassment, but I do think that customer service is something of a special case. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. I think partly because you're working with customers and there is an innate hierarchy within that interaction. Also the kind of people who tend to take service industry jobs and how they are treated within those roles. The statistics are with me here because 67% of customer service workers report sexual harassment, which goes up to 100% in the case of flight attendants, which is interesting. I once wrote an essay about this, so I'm full of fun sexual harassment facts that I like to bust out at parties. People love it. So I think something that's worth establishing is that the customer service industry is a female industry. When people talk about the feminization of the workplace, what they're normally getting mad about is the fact that the kind of jobs we have now aren't about making things an industry, they're about selling things. And those roles tend to rely on how women are, generally speaking, raised to be accommodating and good with people. Which I would like to clarify doesn't mean it's not still a lot of work. Like, you can be really good at something and still find it draining. It's like you can be really great at tennis, but that doesn't mean it's not still an exhausting and sweaty business, or so I've been told. I don't think I've ever played tennis, but I have smiled and nodded while people say some odd shit to me at work. And I think the problem as well is that the view of this work as like an innate ability is part of why it gets deemed unskilled labour, which I really take against. You can definitely be bad at customer service. You can be fired from customer service, not for specifically doing anything wrong, but for not being able to provide the kind of experience they want you to give the customer. And I think it comes back to the idea that we don't really value emotion work. And you know, these roles do tend to be quite low paid, as well as being fairly unstable, like 0 hours, for example. So you can just not be given shifts anymore. So because there's quite a high turnover and you're not paid that highly and your contract isn't that stable, you really do feel you have to be performing to the best of your role if you want to keep that job, which isn't necessarily a terrible thing, but it does mean when you've got someone being inappropriate, I think it puts you in a position where you aren't able to tell them to leave you alone. So if you take the customer service role as we kind of know it today back to where it began, you're looking at sort of the Victorian era with the shop girl. And the point of the shop girl was to match the aesthetic of the store, to be part of the experience, a display piece, essentially, like part of what was on offer within the shop. So you can see from kind of the conception of the customer service role we have today, once it moved from outside, like families running their own shop, you're very much hired to be kind of like one of the products. And in terms of aesthetics, it is still true that if you are conventionally good looking, you're more likely to get a customer service job. And that's not just true in the obvious places like Abercrombie and Fitch with their openly creepy hiring policies. It does filter down into other companies as well, from things as small as like you have to probably fit in a uniform that they're going to give you, but also, you know, who an interviewer is going to consider to be friendly looking, approachable, professional. Those things aren't objective. And there's definitely still very much pressure to conform to very specific feminine roles within the service industry. So waitresses who touch customers in restaurants get higher tips, and bar staff are actively encouraged to flirt with customers to get better results. And I'm not saying that's always a bad thing or never a fun part of a job. Like, if one of my colleagues wants to serve someone because they think they're hot, I will stand aside. I am an excellent colleague and even better person. But I think the constant emphasis on having those kinds of interactions, aside from whether you think someone's attractive, but it being part of what you offer as a service, feeds into the creation of these roles that cater to a male fantasy of a woman who serves you, who is okay with anything you say, who wants you to touch her. And you know, to people carrying it out in those scenarios, sexual harassment might not even seem inappropriate to them. It's a natural extension of what they're being presented with. Or, to give them less of a benefit of a doubt, it's something they know they can get away with because the conflict resolution you have been taught in your job is to smile nod and just wait for it to be over. And especially if you're someone who's quite rule abiding, or as is the case for a lot of service industry workers, quite young, you're not necessarily going to question that. So a lot of the time, even if someone's making you feel uncomfortable, the pressure can be to go along with that. When your mantra is, how can I help you? It doesn't really encourage you to know when to draw a line or when you're well within your rights to just walk away. And I think as well, no matter how confident you might feel in your daily life, to tell someone to fuck off is very different when you're representing a company and all of your training has revolved around the idea of positive interactions with the public. So I definitely have mixed feelings about the fact that a lot of the time these conversations seem to require the men and women who've experienced unpleasantness to like carve themselves open and give salacious details. And you know, I've a couple of times been in situations where I think back and I'm like, should never approach that person, should never have offered my help. But when your job is to be as helpful as possible, and also you don't assume the worst of people, which is an exhausting thing to do in itself and not something that I like to do, although at this point I often feel I kind of have to, which is a shame because I don't relish having to think bad things of others in order to protect myself from being judged for their actions. But at work, your natural instinct will be to offer that 5-star, how can I help you customer service experience, which in any other scenario, a lot of the time you would be applauded for. But when someone takes the opportunity to exploit or take advantage of your eagerness to help them, suddenly it's your fault for doing your job. A lot of the time, instead of there being any emphasis on safeguarding or training. And I do feel quite inclined in terms of personal experiences to keep this fairly academic and removed. But I think that desire comes largely from not really wanting to hear people's hot takes about what I should have done differently in the scenarios that I've been in, or to deem my experiences a bit too trivial to really like warrant this conversation. But I would like to illustrate my points with a personal anecdote that I think is quite light-hearted, just to, you know, pepper in some flavour, just to spice it up. So in a tale as old as time, I was approached by an older man at the front desk at one of my jobs who said he had a problem with his foot and needed a first aider, and I was like, I am a first aider and I shall help you, strange man. And it was on my way to the first aid room that I thought, perhaps not a good idea. But we went in, and long story short, nothing wrong with that man's foot, he just wanted me to touch his feet. Also, he told me he was a world championship snooker player, which I did look it up, and I think he might have lied to me. And obviously you're well within your rights to hear that story and think, well, what an idiot. You know, you should never have gone anywhere alone with him, you should have refused your help. But I think that story very nicely illustrates, one, the sort of eagerness and willingness to help that you're encouraged to have in a customer service role, which I think is a nice thing I'd like to re-establish. I am a Hufflepuff, I like to help, so sue me. And two, the fact that people take advantage of that. Sorry to all the people in my real life who will have heard me tell that story now for the 3rd to 12th time. I just feel like it has everything, you know, feet, snooker. But yeah, I think we need to acknowledge that when you have often young, often female, often not super financially secure workers interacting with people who have a lot of the power in that relationship, both in terms of spending power, but also in terms of being valued by the company in question, because they're what keeps it going. We have to look into how the culture around that and what we tell customer service workers they have to put up with is going to put them in positions that aren't great. I do think that's being recognised in some places. At my university union, the bar staff wear t-shirts that on the back say, I'm a human being, please don't push, pull or poke me, which I think is ballsy AF, and I'm here for it. I just don't think that family attractions and clothes shops are gonna necessarily be adopting that anytime soon. I guess that's the inherent difference between places where you actually want your customers to be there and to buy stuff, and places where, one, you're subsidised, and two, it would be best if everyone went home. But this is my take. Here it is for you. I'd love to hear what you guys think, your experiences of working in customer service, and I will see you guys again soon.